welcome everybody to MEIC's Thursday legislative update call. It is, according to my calendar, day 72 of the legislative session. The legislature is rushing to meet another transmittal deadline, and both the House and Senate is all day on the Senate and House floor. And that's any bills that have been amended in the House they didn't start in need to go through a transmittal deadline of Saturday. So there's lots of a rush to basically move all those bills through. And I've been watching the House floor all day and in and out of the Capitol. We are the rumor, and there's always rumors about when the legislature actually will end. It's called sine die. However, I think this is pretty well founded. I think is going to be sometime around the 25th, 26th, or 28th. So the legislature is going to end 5 or 7 days early, is what it's looking like. They're trying to potentially save legislative days so that they can call a special session later on to address what is predicted to be some potentially major budget shortfalls due to a absence of federal matching dollars. So I'm not sure. Again, this is all, sort of crystal ball, but I think it's probably right. In speaking with some of the leadership, that's the plan at this point. And I don't know when that special session will occur, but probably towards the fall would be my guess. So we're busy. We're still at it. We've had some great successes, and we've also had some losses this week. And we're just continuing to crank away and also keeping an eye on that final deadline. So we're going to run through our slideshow here. But first, we'd like to start with a slide on some of the bad stuff that came out earlier this week from our dear president. So, Ann, I'm going to pass it off to you.
Dear. Dear is not the right term I would use. So on Wednesday, and then again yesterday, the administration, Trump, I hate even saying his name, issued about 5 executive orders and a number of proclamations, all trying to force coal down our throats, all with the intention of allowing coal operations to ignore pollution limits, particularly mercury and air toxics rule. And let's be clear why this country has moved away from coal. And it's not because people care as much about pollution as they should. It is because of cost. And utilities and utility commissions have decided to get off of coal because it's too expensive compared to alternatives. That has been happening for the last decade plus. Companies and utilities have made decisions based upon economics to move beyond this resource. And what these executive orders and proclamations do is force us backward to continue operating facilities that are uneconomic, that are raising our utility bills. All I can say is the oligarchs in charge of this country don't pay their own utility bills. They have no idea what this does to people. And so these executive orders and proclamations are going to do nothing but increase the cost of electricity, because if you force us to move backwards into uneconomic resources and relying on uneconomic resources, that's what we get. So thank you. We're going to have more pollution and higher bills and not address the climate crisis. In fact, we're going to move backwards. I just want to give you a couple highlights of what the president's executive orders and proclamations did. They granted Northwestern Energy's request for essentially a waiver from the mercury and air toxic standard. Remember, Colstrip has the highest emission rate for toxic air pollutants of any coal plant in the nation. And everybody else, every similar facility has already installed pollution controls, except for Colstrip. And what this proclamation does is it says that Northwestern and the owners of Colstrip do not have to upgrade the plant for another 2 years. So it pushes it out up until 2029. but it also allows the president, or the president is allowed under this provision of the Clean Air Act to also extend that again. So it's at least 2 years before the plant will have to comply. But he also directed EPA to expedite approval of a new mercury and air toxics rule that will likely eliminate any obligation to limit air toxins near coal plants. This absolutely puts a disproportionate burden on those people who live nearby, particularly in Northern Cheyenne, who have been very, very committed to this issue and trying to force this plant to reduce its pollution. So slap in the face for anybody who cares about public health. MEIC has worked on the coal leasing moratorium. It's a long story. There's a coal leasing moratorium in place, and he directed the Department of Interior to eliminate that moratorium. He directed the DOJ, Department of Justice, to evaluate and go after any local or state climate programs that may somehow or another conflict with federal law, which is a pretty broad term, and it's just putting these states under a microscope. He called out a couple states who have very progressive climate policies, clearly trying to intimidate them into reversing course. He directed the agency, the Department of Interior, to overturn the Powder River Basin Resource Management Plan decision on coal leasing that said basically it's not economic to lease coal. So we're not going to proceed with leasing coal in Wyoming and Montana areas of the Powder River Basin. He's directed them to overturn that. He directed, I believe it was CEQ, to create a categorical exclusion from NEPA for coal projects. He directed EPA to eliminate the Clean Power Plan. He directed his direction to both Department of Energy and DERF, which is the other entity, Department of Interior, to find ways to define coal as a critical mineral, which is it gives them all sorts of opportunity to move forward without adequate review. And it's directed Department of Energy to identify areas in the United States in which there is a risk of reliability in the system. This is so outside the bounds of what the federal government does. I can't even begin to express that this is something that has never been done before. And what he said is, in any areas in which they find that there is a resource adequacy concern, that it's giving DOE permission to force coal plants to remain open. So under other provisions of law, whether all of this is legal is another question. There are some very, very, very smart lawyers across the country putting their heads together, trying to figure out what they can do about this. But it is absolutely a threat to the climate. It's a threat to public health. It is setting us up for years worth of litigation and fighting, and we will not take this just sitting down. We are going to fight these things as we can. Because a lot of this, the good news is he doesn't have the ability to override Congress. And a lot of these, many of these are statutory obligations on the part of the agency. And so the president can't just by fiat. He is not a king, despite his actions. He cannot by fiat just eliminate the laws that have been established by Congress. They will have to go through a process. They'll have to go through rulemaking processes. And that's where we will engage. We will let you know when it's time to engage on all those rulemaking processes. And we will litigate as we are able. But this is demoralizing. It's intended to be demoralizing. But I just want to say the fight has just begun, and we are just getting started. And we have a lot of fight left in us, because this makes all of us in this office really angry. So more to come. But it was a pretty bleak day, but it's a long way from over.
Okay, and we have some new intel, which
Before
I'm not
moving really quick,
familiar
Derp,
with.
sorry, there's just 2 questions in the chat that deal with that specifically. Can the coal revival be challenged? I think you kind of spoke to that, Ann, but the second one, won't most of these have to go through rulemaking, declaring coal as categorically excluded from NEPA? If you want to speak to that.
And you're on mute.
Thank you. Some of these will and some of these won't. A lot of them will have to go through the rulemaking process where there's public participation. The agency has to prove that it's not being arbitrary and capricious by overturning Biden era rules or previous rules of the administration's. So yeah, they are going to have to go through that for a lot of these things. But unfortunately, like the MATS, mercury and air toxics, approval, that is not a rulemaking. There is a provision in the Clean Air Act that gives the president the ability to find that it's in the national security to provide this waiver to a power plant or to any plant that is going to be putting out high volumes of air toxins. And if it's not technologically available, the control technology is not technologically available, the president could do that. Those are two big questions. Whether the president can do this without any evidence, because the Biden administration, when they passed the MATS rule, provided gobs of evidence that it was absolutely technologically feasible because everybody else has already done it. It's not a mystery when everybody else has already installed the technology. So, lawyers are looking at this right now, trying to decide what the law is around these kind of presidential actions and what can be done. But a lot of these, Kim, you're right, we'll have to go through the Administrative Procedures Act.
Okay. Moving back to our legislative agenda. Thank you, Ann. Apparently, if you call the legislative switchboard, you can ask that they deliver a message to the entire chamber. And I'm unfamiliar with this new intel, but apparently this is something that you can do, which is incredibly useful for when we have those full floor votes. So I would really encourage folks to, when we encourage you to contact the floor about second, third reading votes, that you make sure that either it goes to the full chamber or if we suggest to a targeted list of people, so that you have a higher impact for every time you do something. And we're at a unique, wonderful place right now in terms of the judicial related bills. We have worked our tails off, and by we, I mean all of our members, you, and we have, by my estimation, killed every partisan court bill out there. I don't think that any more can be introduced at this point. And we've killed the General Claims Court, those two bills. So I think there was 5 partisan court bills and 2 General Claims Court bills. And at this point, they have all failed in one part of the process or another, which is absolutely fantastic. That being said, nothing is actually done in the Montana legislature until they adjourn, but we are in a very good position. I suspect they're going to try and attempt something else before they leave, but for now, it appears that all the bluster and saber rattling over reforming our courts has largely failed at this point. There are some bills still out there, but nothing that I deem to be as threatening as the big partisan court and General Claims Court bills. So fantastic. Go back to our victories there. We're not done with victories. Okay, Laura, you're on 889.
Yes, we had some really good victories. This one was the biggest one for land use. We had a couple bad bills either tabled or failed. This one was really bad and it failed on third reading, so that one was pretty close. So that's a big celebratory failure. So this one would have prohibited growth policies from any mention of sensitive areas, and this is another highly specific topic coming out of Gallatin County, as we've been seeing from a lot of land use bills this session, but they had a sensitive lands plan, and so this bill was really targeting that. However, it was so vague and broad that it was really unclear where the line was, what qualifies as sensitive land. It did specifically call out agriculture and open land, historical uses of agriculture, so just really bad stuff. It would have then impacted a county's ability to zone to protect those resources. So we're super happy that this one failed on third reading.
The next bill that died this week, well, it died last week technically, and they never brought it back. They tried twice, and that was HB 877. This is the data center bill. This is Northwestern Energy's bill to try to allow the Colstrip plant. I mean, there's no other way to talk about this, I don't think. Allow the Colstrip plant to become a provider for data centers, and use all the extra power that we're going to have to pay for to subsidize the data center industry. This bill failed twice last week in committee, so yay! Still one bad bill of Northwestern's to go, but this was a nice victory. Thank you all who hurried and made calls on this bill.
And I'll jump in on SB 188. This was a huge win this week. There's still a couple more steps to go, but allowing for shared solar, this bill opens up the opportunity for community projects where you can subscribe into a larger solar development, get bill credits for that. This is for folks that are renting or for whatever other reason aren't able to invest in their own rooftop solar. And it passed out of the House this week. So it's actually passed both the Senate and the House now, but there is an amendment put on in the House Energy Committee, just ensuring that when the Public Service Commission goes to rulemaking, that I believe costs associated with administrating this program are not going to be borne by other utility ratepayers and will be covered by the project. So the Senate is going to have to approve those amendments, but it's inching its way closer to the finish line.
And then the last bill, SB 224, this is an amazing victory. It's creating Indigenous Peoples Day. Senator Shane Morgeau has brought this bill a number of times, as have, I believe, other legislators prior to his trying, but he has been a stalwart on trying to get this. This bill has passed now both houses. It is sent to enrolling. It will be law, and it creates Indigenous Peoples Day on the same day as Columbus Day. So it is a holiday, and it is a big victory that we are finally recognizing in this state that there's an Indigenous history that we should be celebrating. It's offensive that it took this long, but yay, we finally made it.
All right.
Durf, do you want to do it?
Sure. No, that's fine. So MEPA is, we went into this session knowing that we probably would lose these MEPA bills, and unfortunately that seems to be the case. But all is not lost, because there are some good things associated with at least one of the bills, and we do have the Constitution and the court system as a backstop, as we have done repeatedly, rinse, wash, repeat many times before. And so these bills are all, I believe, headed to the governor in one way or another. And I'll touch on them, each one, what they do and where they're at a little bit. But I think that each one of these bills, the next big stop is really the governor's signature. SB 221 is the bill that basically narrows the state's analysis of greenhouse gas emissions to just within the fence line of a project. That bill has made it to the governor at this point. It's just basically going through and rolling, I believe. I think it might have passed third reading today or yesterday. So when it lands on the governor's desk, he has 10 days to make a decision. To give you a sort of an idea of the timeline, if he doesn't sign it within 10 days, then it just by default becomes law. I suspect that what he will do is probably have a signing ceremony with all of the MEPA bills as well as 291 at some point to say that he's reacting to held. So 221, contact the governor, tell him it's bad for Montana, but rest assured, MEIC, we're talking with our attorneys and we're thinking about next strategy. HB 291, we're in the same position. This is the bill that prevents the state from adopting any standard more stringent than federal standards. And of course, because there's no federal standards for greenhouse gas emissions, this by default would probably prevent the state from pursuing regulations to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. That is also now at the governor's desk. And finally, HB 285. This one is the bill that strikes the explicit constitutional language from MEPA and also eliminates some of the sort of more intensive and cumulative and historic analyses that MEPA is useful for. I think this is heading back to the House for concurrence with some of the Senate amendments. That is probably just going to be a performative vote at this point. So if you had anybody to contact on this, I would just say reach out to the governor at this point. Again, all of these bills will, once they land on the governor's desk, have 10 days before he needs to make a decision. And unfortunately, I think he will sign these, but we have some paths forward. We've also gotten some questions about HB 270. It's a good bill. We want to see it signed. In particular, it allows for us to basically hold the DEQ accountable for when they do a bad job in the permitting process. And right now, the law requires us to basically ask for a preliminary injunction right up front before we've even litigated cases. It's problematic in a number of different ways in that regard, and this HB 270 eliminates that requirement under MEPA. So that's a good step forward in terms of the process for when you do have to challenge MEPA analysis. So we do want to see that bill signed and would encourage the governor to sign it. Water and climate. So HB 587, this is the material damage bill. It is now just sitting at Senate Natural Resources, which is their next scheduled meeting is tomorrow. And I suspect that's when they will take action on HB 587. I would reach out to both Senators, Senator Vinton, Senator Gillespie, and Senator Harvey, Butte Democrat, and ask for them to vote no on HB 587. It's a tough committee, and if there's any chance of killing it, it will happen on the Senate floor. But those three folks, if they were to vote against it, if those three folks were to vote against it, we would probably be able to kill the bill there. It's a tough one. Again, this was passed in 2023. Not very similar language, but a similar concept. And ultimately, the U.S. Office of Surface Mining rejected that change. And so we will engage with the approval process at OSM on this bill and advocate for them to not approve this because it's pretty clearly in violation of federal coal mining law. HB 664, the repeal of numeric nutrient standards, did pass out of committee and is now scheduled for the Senate floor. I don't know if it hasn't been scheduled yet. I think that they'll probably wait till next week on this to get the bills that have been amended through the process first, because that deadline is Saturday. But now's the time to contact your senator, and in particular, the 9 folks that we've listed numerous times before. And Ben, if you could dredge that up, that would also be useful to drop into the chat. We did get a Republican, conservative Republican in opposition to this in committee, which is interesting. So there is, a small chance that we can beat it on the Senate floor as well. But again, this is this goes through a federal approval process, and I think that the state is operating outside of the Clean Water Act, and I think this is unlikely to be approved. But is going to cause a lot of litigation and confusion in the interim. Finally, HB 685, also just in front of Senate Natural Resources. This is the bill that changes Montana's non-degradation policy from one of pollution prevention to one of pollution allowance through what they call a feasibility allowance, as well as eliminating the balancing test that occurs for economic benefits of a particular project which is going to pollute compared to the societal and environmental costs of pollution. And they're eliminating the language that requires the second half of that analysis, where they evaluate the costs of pollution, so that the DEQ is only charged with considering the benefits. This bill's in front of Senate Natural Resources, and again, I think they'll probably take action on it tomorrow, so reach out to the Senate Natural Resources Committee to encourage them to vote no on this. And, well, this is just a good, again, reminder, but also I think this slide's a little too confident. I think we need to stay alert, because I've seen last day of the session, entire concepts pass, rules be suspended, entire bills dumped into other bills. So again, there's nothing that can't happen. We need to be careful and make sure that we're ready to react. But for now, we can celebrate. PFAS, Ben, is this you?
Yes, thank you very much. So we got some fun updates on plastic pollution and PFAS. House Bill 477, the phase-out single-use polystyrene or styrofoam bill, has passed out of Senate Natural Resources. Well, we'll see, a hiccup on it. It got amended, which pushed the dates back further than we would like, but we still are asking for support on this bill. We are working to amend it back to its original state. So that will likely be on second reading quite soon. So please contact any senator, your senator, and ask them to support that bill. And we had a PFAS study bill, House Joint Resolution 37, that didn't last long. It was tabled pretty much immediately after the hearing, unfortunately. Had a great hearing, some folks giving really great testimony on what an enormous problem this is across our state right now. The good news on that is that there is another study resolution, House Joint Resolution 44, that is on endocrine disrupting chemicals, that is sponsored by a Republican with a bunch of Republican co-sponsors, which is, for one, just interesting to see that there's some interest in action from the right on pollution and widespread pollution that in our waterways. And in that hearing, we had some supportive Democrats ask if we could fold in aspects of the PFAS study, because PFAS are endocrine disruptors as well. And so that was welcome. So really excited. I think if we can change horses, that's great, and still make some progress on this. So please support House Joint Resolution 44. It will have executive action on Monday, I think, in House Natural Resources.
Okay, so some land use bills updates. While some of the housing bills are moving forward favorably, the triplex fourplex bill was tabled. I think some of the rationale was that we do want to give the Land Use Planning Act cities some time to see how their menu of options for housing density plays out, as well as the bill that passed last session that permitted duplexes. So this one was tabled. The parking minimum mandate reform bill is still moving ahead through the Senate. I think that still needs second reading on the floor. So contact your senators there. That one does not, it was amended to not deal with commercial parking minimums. So that one specifically deals with residential parking minimums, but it's still a great bill for increasing housing density and starting to reduce unnecessarily excessive parking requirements that don't suit every community. And then we had a great transportation bill that would increase a community's ability to request expansions in their urban transportation district. That one's moving ahead successfully. It had third reading today. I believe it passed. I need to confirm, but it has had very good success. And we hope to see that one pass. Yeah, okay. And we kind of mentioned some bills that failed, so that's great. We had a House Bill 714 was the bad family transfer bill. This one was amended to the point that it is, I wouldn't say a great bill, but it's better. It would have prevented local governments from denying a family transfer application unless they could prove with documented evidence that the applicant intended to evade subdivision. That would have essentially eliminated their ability to deny applications. Currently, they build a case using circumstantial evidence, rebuttable presumptions. That's really the only way to prove intent. The other really concerning thing this bill would have done was it expanded the definition of immediate family members to siblings, grandchildren, grandparents. And so that has magnifiers for how many lots this could have created through one family transfer. So that was amended out, so that was really good. There were some good pieces in this bill. There's an increased penalty for proven evasions, which is unlikely that they could be proven. However, it's good that there's more of a disincentive. There is going to be a affidavit that the applicant has to sign that will be created, by the Attorney General. It also requires that the remaining parcel in the family transfer is at least 5 acres. So that wasn't something that was previously there. The last session, we saw a bill that allowed family transfer parcels to go down to 5 acres, even if the zoning required larger lot sizes. This is now saying that both the gifted tract and the parent tract have to be at least 5 acres. So that's good. So they can't create a 5 acre tract and then have a smaller remaining tract. Unfortunately, there was some other good provisions in this bill that were also amended out. There was going to be an increased work timeline for review of applications that was taken back out. There was a provision for adjacent landowner notice that was removed, unfortunately. So this one is a little neutral for me right now. There's some good things. I wouldn't say it's a great bill, but I do like the increased penalty. So that one is going for third reading tomorrow. And then we still have the well drillers bill, Senate Bill 436, and we are still concerned about that one. That one has not had executive action. We do think there's going to be some amendments, so please keep a close eye on that. And we will be tracking that one very closely as well.
All right, and that's me. So there's a couple of nuclear bills that we've been tracking, and before talking about these bills specifically, just a general overview, if you haven't been on some of these calls previously, we remain a healthy level of skepticism on the actual potential that nuclear energy presents for decarbonizing. While it is a low carbon energy in theory, there's still a slew of obstacles that really prevent it from living up to promises, including costs higher than any other form of energy, but also really real challenges with what you do with the waste and how it impacts marginal communities, especially indigenous communities. And on top of all that, a lot of the current kind of fervor around this technology is built around technologies that really haven't been proven yet, and in initial projects have so far continued to really balloon above and beyond projected budgets. And I know that there are a lot of mixed feelings about nuclear, and would be happy to talk more with anyone on this call if you wanted to reach out and talk about what's going on. But specific to these two bills, House Bill 623 would allow for storage of radioactive nuclear waste in Montana. We worked closely with the American Indian Caucus on the House side to get an amendment on that would require approval from any tribe within 50 miles of a proposed facility, as well as approval from the county that that facility is going to be sited in. When that moved over to the Senate actually stripped that amendment from the bill, and that has since been voted on in the Senate, so that those amendments are going to be headed back to the House. What that means is the House made an amendment to require this vote, and now they're going to have a chance to contend with the Senate stripping that amendment. So we would encourage y'all to contact your representatives to not agree with those amendments from the Senate. The American Indian Caucus will be standing up in opposition to it. We're hopeful that we can bring that up. And then the other bill, HB 696, is about citing uranium conversion and enrichment facilities in Montana. And this would be able to process uranium produced anywhere in the world. And that uranium would be coming through Montana on our roadway, on our rail system, through our communities, with potential for accidents and contaminating communities and waterways with really highly radioactive material. The same amendment that was proposed for the previous bill in the House narrowly failed when it was in the House. That bill went through the Senate, it passed out of committee, and we're actually awaiting the second reading on the floor. Could be any time now. The Senate remains on floor all day, and I think they have about 10 more bills. I've been keeping an eye on it until second reading comes up. We've similarly been working with the American Indian Caucus on this one, and there will be some folks introducing the amendment again on the floor to hopefully require that tribal approval and consultation if we're going to be siting these facilities in Montana.
Okay, utility accountability. This is a disappointing one. Northwestern Energy is getting its way. This bill is making its way through the Senate, past second reading for third reading today. Ultimately, what this bill does is make it far more difficult if your home burns down because the utility failed to maintain its system adequately. It makes it very difficult for you to recover, to be made whole. There's just so many, and the bill was enormous and horrible as introduced. There were a lot of amendments that were added in the House that mitigated some of the harm, but it did not mitigate all of the harm. And then in the Senate, they rejected a number of amendments that, our side proposed, came out of committee, and it passed the House floor. So this is Northwestern and our co-ops not being as accountable as they otherwise should be for maintaining their transmission system, which has sparked fires all over the nation, or all over certainly this region in the West. And there are better ways to do things. It's not like this is an impossible task. There are utilities that have gotten serious about mitigating wildfire liability or wildfires and have succeeded. So this is just a get out of jail free card for our utilities, unfortunately, to our detriment. HB 911, this is a bill that is complicated, but it's quite clear that Northwestern wants to acquire this larger share of Colstrip that it is set to acquire at the end of this year, giving it far more power than it needs. It wants to serve data centers with that excess power, and it is trying to find a way to create a separate entity under the umbrella of the utility to work with these data centers, provide power to anyone without Public Service Commission oversight. This bill is deregulation. It just is. And you really need to verify that there are serious firewalls between the public utility that is regulated and its customers and this separate entity. The problem is when they are both under the same umbrella as of a utility company. So Northwestern is the parent. If these data center loads don't show up, or they leave quickly because we figured out a better way to do AI, which is absolutely a possibility. then we're going to have a utility that has a lot of stranded assets on its unregulated side. It will drag down the utility generally. That will harm the parent company. It will make it harder for the parent, or could make it harder for the parent to maintain its bond ratings, to borrow money at an affordable price, which absolutely impacts us. It's complicated, but it is a dangerous path forward and deserves a whole lot more consideration by our legislature. It is not one of those 11th hour deals. It shouldn't be one of those 11th hour deals, but that's exactly what this is. So this one has not had a hearing in the Senate Energy Committee yet. We anticipate that will probably happen on Monday. So we will be there. And then we already said, woohoo, HB 877, that bill is dead. And I spoke with the sponsor of the bill and he said he is not bringing it back. So there's one victory. We just have to do something about 9/11. I think that's one that we're going to have to amend at the very least.
And we forgot to put in there the study resolution on data centers, and it's not at the resolution page either. So I just want to poke that in there. I just dropped it in the chat.
Thank you. This is a resolution that had a hearing yesterday in House Energy and passed out almost unanimously. There's one no vote. And it's for the legislature to study the impact that these data centers could have on the energy system, on our costs, on water. Data centers have historically been large users of water. So, it makes a ton of sense for the legislature, before it jumps in with both feet, to encourage the development of data centers, to understand what their impacts are on the state and to establish some sideboards. And we think that this resolution will help us do that. So we strongly support that resolution. And what was the number on that? I'm terrible at numbers. HJ 46. Thank you, Ben. Okay, back to Nick.
Great. And I'll try to go through these energy bills somewhat quickly. I mentioned the Montana Solar Shares Act. We have an amendment headed back to the House, but crossing our fingers, the prospects look potentially good there. Then House Bill 760 is another good solar bill, and it just sets some guardrails around door-to-door sales folks for solar. We've seen bad actors in other states using deceptive practices, and this prohibits the use of deceptive practices in selling rooftop installations, and gives the consumer a little more clarity on what they're getting themselves into. So this passed out of Senate Energy. It is going to be headed to the floor, and so far has encountered very little resistance. And then House Bill 848, another one that's encountered very little resistance. And this is kind of energy, kind of transportation, falls into a lot of things, but would fund Montana Passenger Rail Authority, which is working to enhance and improve Montana's passenger rail. It's a highly energy efficient form of transportation, and also would really promote mobility in the state. It had a great hearing in Senate Highway and Transportation yesterday. There's in the range of 20 proponents, and I don't know of any opponents. So a lot of support for funding that group. And then into the oppose, this first one is kind of in the middle because we don't oppose it very strongly, but there are a couple of adjustments. HB 939 kind of came out of all the bad wind bills that we saw earlier in the session. There was a discussion with the energy committees, and they brought in some folks from NextEra, who's a big energy developer, just to talk about wind and what kind of get into some of the issues that folks have. And this is a bill to really set some reasonable boundaries and expectations when it comes to developing wind in Montana's communities, as far as setbacks and how those are particularly cited in a range from residences. So the previous wind bills we saw were more restrictive and really going to curtail wind development. This one is more targeted at providing that clarity for developers. There are some minor amendments, particularly concerning the contracts between developers and the landowners. Those we would say should remain mostly private because is sensitive information in there, as well as just some clarifying things that some of our partners are working to get into there to make sure that it works with the developers as far as the timeline that they can provide a really micro siting map with the Department of Environmental Quality. HB 122 unfortunately passed and is headed to the governor. This just gives default access to right-of-way for gas pipelines. They already do use the right-of-way, but they have to go through collaborative agreements with local jurisdictions, and this is going to limit that collaboration. So unfortunately, that is headed to the governor, but you can contact governor to not sign it. And then lastly, HJ 17 resolution that really has a slew of deregulation requests from the federal government. I believe it had a hearing and is awaiting a vote, but I can't remember exactly where it is. And
That's
it,
correct. Yeah. It's waiting.
yeah. And Shannon, feel free to talk more on it.
Yeah, I've talked about it every week for a while, but I think you covered it. It is also calling on to give broader power to the president to eliminate and weaken a lot of environmental laws in the name of national security. So what we're hearing a lot of lately. But yeah, I encourage you to contact Energy on that one.
All right. And then we'll breeze through transmission. So far, we continue to have really good bipartisan support for transmission. We know that we need to increase capacity in Montana for affordable, reliable, and clean energy. And that's something that folks can get around behind, that we do need transmission to support Montana's energy system. All these bills are moving along. SB 301, SB 355 had, I think, second reading today. That one increases competition. HJ 15 is on to second reading in the Senate, is just outlining the need for transmission and the benefits that increased capacity would bring. SJ 12 is going to have second reading here shortly in the House, I believe. And this is a study resolution just looking at how interstate transmission congestion has created economic losses for Montana. And then SJ 21 has a hearing coming up in the House that is a further dive into interstate transmission, but from the perspective of how Montana can coordinate with other states to improve transmission across our borders. And then HJ 12 had a hearing this week. That's the resolution that really just has a lot of bad information on electric vehicles, a misstated EV mandate that is really just some pollution standards for exhaust that still preserves the right for customers to choose what vehicle that they buy. And just has a lot of information saying that EVs aren't suitable for Montana's roads, which is not true. SJ 12 or 11, I'm not sure.
J11 is an interim study on farmers markets and food supplies. It's looking at how we can bolster our local and regional food networks. And we support it because changes in our diet and reliance on local food systems is a great way for us to impact climate change positively. And it's a good bill. That one has passed out of, where was it? In Agriculture Committee. I forget which side it's on now. I think it's on the House side. So yes, contact your representative, please.
And there's a really great transportation study bill that has passed both transportation committees. That one is looking at studying both public transit and the commuter rail, and also it includes autonomous vehicles in case that becomes relevant someday. But it would be great to have a study of transportation in general to see what options we can have in Montana moving forward, because especially public transportation could really be improved. So that's going to the floor. So please contact your representatives.
Dirk, do you want to talk about the home insurance? Make a pitch?
Yeah, well, we are working sort of peripherally on an, believe it or not, a rising property insurance bill. And the connection here being obviously that with a changing climate comes impacts over increased wildfires and flooding, et cetera. And we have come up with a study resolution, or not we, but a group of us, to evaluate this problem, because Montana has some of the fastest home insurance premium increases in the nation. Believe it or not, we're like 4th or 5th, and well above the national average. So the study resolution would evaluate all of the different causes for this increase, including these impacts from climate, as well as some other things. And what we're looking for, the resolution is probably going to be introduced on Monday and heard later in the week, is folks, in particular, if you live in a rural county who have just experienced increased property insurance rates, or even denials because of where you live, that would be really useful. And so, Ben, if you want to drop your and my email into the chat, get a hold of us, because that is just gold testimony for trying to get this study resolution moving. And we'd like to find some people who are directly impacted and be able to provide that testimony for why this needs to be evaluated and we need to address this.
And there's upcoming events. So there's a Bernie Sanders and AOC rally next week in Missoula on Wednesday. And I am super excited because, as of right now anyway, I get to speak at it. And that just sounds fun. Northwestern Energy is having its rate case coming up here shortly. That begins on April 22nd before the Public Service Commission. You should be able to watch it online if you're so inclined. You got to be pretty geeky if you want to watch that online, but I encourage you to do so. I will be. And then April 17th through 27th is Earth Day in Billings. And I'm going to drop in the chat our link to our website, in which if you're in the Billings area, you should check out the events. It's quite a week in Billings, just wonderful events organized by a number of people, including Katie Harrison, who is our MEIC's community connector. But she's also with Sustainable Billings and a zillion other organizations, and is a force to be reckoned with. So I encourage those of you who are new Billings to participate. It's a really important time, I think, for us to gather together as we can to figure out strategies and encourage each other to keep going on. These are pretty difficult times, and I think it's really important that we stick together. So check out these events. And that's all I got. If anybody has questions, here we are, our lobbying team. We have other MEIC staff who are fantastic too, but these are the folks who are in the Capitol a lot. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. But I'm just going to go ahead and say, anyone have a question?
Okay, for HB 270, we want to see it signed. And some of you may notice on the bottom half, there's been amendments, which we call coordinating clauses. This is when you have multiple bills that conflict in the language. There's two different ways you can sort of address this. One is by sending those bills to a conference committee where they actually hash out the language. And another is where you coordinate the two bills and you basically condition the language that if both pass, then any particular section is going to read this way, so that the language doesn't conflict when it's actually time to add it into Montana code. And the HB 270 has 3 different coordinating sections for 3 different scenarios in which one bill passes, another bill passes, or all 3 bills pass. And all 3 bills are probably going to pass. And so what we would like to see is support for HB 270 because it has that good language on basically preliminary injunctions and vacature, which I can get into if you really care about. But there is a positive step forward in HB 270, and regardless, any bill will stand on its own. So it's not as much as the other bills have been incorporated into it as they have been coordinated in terms of their passage. And so even if HB 270 were to not pass, the other bills probably would be negative. So we are wanting to see HB 270 pass.
Missoula Rally, somebody asked, somebody put it in the chat. It's in the Adams Center at 12:30 on Wednesday, the 16th. And for anybody who participated in other rallies, last week, you saw what an uplifting experience that was. And I think we need more of that. So, it's called the Fighting Oligarchy Tour. I think it should be calling Fighting the Broligarchs, but nobody asked me. Okay, here we are at the end of the hour. You know how to find us. We'll be back next Thursday, and we are happy to chat with you or to, email, correspond if that's what works for you, as we move forward towards the waning days of the session where mischief occurs.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you in a week.